Welcome to Mama J's Kitchen. Today I'm going to be making white chocolate raspberry cheesecake. This happens to be one of my favorite things to make and one of my most requested things from my nieces and actually my mom as well. So what I've done is I've actually separated out all the ingredients based on the steps involved. So the first thing we're going to do is do the crust, which is the step one. Then we're going to do the cheesecake filling. And because this is white chocolate raspberry and there happens to be a raspberry filling topping, that will be the topping portion there. So to get started, we're going to go ahead and begin with the crust. The crust actually begins with about 2 cups of ground graham cracker crust. To get to about 2 cups, I've actually used about 1.5 packets of crackers, and I pulse those in my food processor. Didn't take very long, so. And then we're using about 1/3 of a cup of sugar, and I have a stick of butter. We do not put any salt in here because it's not really going to be necessary because there's enough savory in the rest of the cheesecake. So we're just going to mix all this together, and then we will pat all this down in the base of the spring-formed pan. And then we're gonna bake that for about 15 minutes on 350 degrees. As you can see, I'm using glass bowls so that you can kind of see through everything and what all my ingredients are. And again, this is white chocolate raspberry cheesecake. And I will have the directions and the recipe displayed on the screen as we are going through this. So you really want to work all the butter and sugar together so it has a real nice consistency so it can press down well in the pan. So this is the spring-formed pan I'm using. I actually got this at Kohl's. I guess I'm allowed to say that. A shout out to Kohl's. It is a Food Network pan, so another shout out to Food Network. I really like this one. It has a nice latch, and it was actually a gift from my mom. Thanks, Mom. And you don't need to put any butter or anything on the bottom for the first part of this. So what we're gonna do is just put all the crumbs in here. And when you're making a cheesecake in a spring-form pan, you do not want to put the crust along the side. This is just kind of a tip for those. You don't want to put the crust up on the side of the pan because we're going to be, obviously releasing it from the pan. So we're just going to press everything down, press everything down nice and firm. We're going to just have the crust on the bottom. It will not come up the sides of the cake. And then once we bake this crust for about 15 minutes, then what we'll do, and it'll be cooling while we're making the filling here, which is the actual cheesecake itself. We will put a little non-stick spray around the edge here so that when we release this, it will come off nice and easy and our cheesecake won't stick. So this is what the bottom of the crust, I know it seems very simple, very elementary, but you want it very tight. And so now I'm gonna put this in the oven on 350 for about 15 minutes, and that'll give me time to make the filling. Forgot to mention this. You also want to put your pan, your springform pan, on top of another pan. I like to do this just so it adds a layer of protection, so it doesn't get too overheated. And also when we go to bake the cheesecake, we're going to also use this pan. So we're going to stack the spring pan form on top of, you can use a pizza pan or just a regular baking sheet. The next item on the list here is our filling. So the first thing we're going to do, because we're making white chocolate cheesecake, white chocolate raspberry cheesecake, the first thing we're going to do is melt our chocolate. So you can use your favorite white chocolate, whichever you choose, but my favorite chocolate happens to be Ghirardelli's chocolate, the San Francisco brand. So that's what I chose. So this, you'll need basically 8 ounces of white chocolate. So you can either use, what I did is I used 2 of the bars of their white chocolate. So that's what happens to be in here. You want to break those into those little pieces. So that's what this equates to, is 2 of the bars. How we're going to melt this, the easiest way to do that is we're going to put 1/3 of boiling water on top of the chocolate. Because we're also going to not just melt the chocolate, we also want it to be kind of a little bit more liquidy. What I'm doing is 1/3 cup of the boiling water. We're going to just pour it over top of the chocolate. And then I'm going to kind of swirl it around. We just want to make sure that we're hitting all the chocolate. And then cover it. The lid should work, if not, yeah, that lid works perfect. So we're just going to set this aside and let that kind of do what it needs to do, which is melt. Then the fun part, we're going to blend the cream cheese, which is the main ingredient here to our cheesecake. One thing I forgot to mention is before you get started with your cheesecake, one of the important things to do is when you're setting everything up, you want to make sure your cream cheese is at room temperature. Sit your cream cheese and your 3 eggs out. Get those at room temperature right away. So, you know, it's really important to do that because it will really provide a good consistency to blending all of your ingredients together, and it will provide a really creamy cheesecake. And that's really the best cheesecake, is when it's creamy. The 4 4-ounce cubes of cream cheese, they are at room temperature. The 3 eggs are at room temperature as well. So I'm going to start blending the cream cheese, and I'm going to put them in there one at a time, and just as easier to do it that way. Okay, we're still waiting on our crust in the oven. I've got about 5 more minutes left on that, so I started creaming the cream cheese. What we'll be adding to the cream cheese in this order, since it's creamed, we're going to be adding the sugar, the salt, we're going to be adding the vanilla, and then we will be adding the eggs one at a time. But before I do that, what I wanted to do is open up the white chocolate and give that a stir so that you can kind of see what that looks like. We just need to get this whisked together good. Okay, so now I'm just going to prepare this. Now our white chocolate is nice and has a good consistency. And we're going to go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients to the cream cheese. Go ahead and start stirring. I'm going to add the sugar, 1 ingredient at a time. And then we're going to add it, and then as we add each ingredient, I'm going to just scrape the sides and make sure everything's mixed well, and then add the next ingredient. It's kind of the best way to do that on these stand mixers, because you just want to make sure things aren't sticking to the side. And then goes the salt. And this is actually 1 tablespoon of vanilla, pure vanilla extract. Do not use imitation vanilla here, please. And on this, I actually am beating this on about in between a 2 and a 4, so about a 3. And the consistency is very creamy. And I'm just going to scrape everything down, make sure we've got it all together, and you can see we already look like cheesecake and we don't have our eggs in there yet. And then the last thing, after I do the eggs, then we're going to add our white chocolate. And then we can say we have a white chocolate cheesecake. I have already removed the crust from the oven, and I'm letting that cool while we're doing all this stuff. And so at this point, what I'm going to do here is I like to crack my eggs in a bowl and then put them in one at a time. Just a little easier. And then you can make sure you don't have any shells in there. And do use large eggs. I would use large eggs in this instance because I am using 3. You could go with 4 eggs if you're using medium eggs, just depends on what you have in your fridge. And so this is what our white chocolate looks like after we've melted it with the 1/3 cup of boiled water. As you can see, we're good and runny now. I'm gonna use actually a clean spatula here and just fold the white chocolate in. I also wanted to show you just kind of the consistency here of this cheesecake. So you can see it's a nice creamy, smooth texture. So we're just gonna fold this in and scrape all the goodness out of the bowl.
Is this for me?
That is for you. I'm letting Faith, my daughter, who's also my videographer here, and this was her idea, putting Mama J on the YouTube.
Because you're good at what you do.
Here, sweetheart. All right, so we're just gonna fold the white chocolate in, making our white chocolate cheesecake. I'm actually gonna turn the oven down. Can you turn the oven down for me? To 300. So we're gonna bake this cheesecake at 300 degrees for approximately an hour. And then we should be good to go. What I'm gonna do here is show you our crust. So the crust is nice and toasted, as you can see here. I'm gonna spray the pan, so you can either spray the pan or butter it. I prefer to butter, so I do have a butter spray that I can use. I will be using a butter spray. Just gives us a better flavor. And then we're just gonna spray that around the edge. And again, we wanted to keep the spring pan here. As you can see on here, if you didn't have this spring pan sitting on another pan, like I had butter that came through, the butter that we put with the graham cracker crust, you would have had that dripping on your oven. So you definitely want to put that under even when you're using when you're just baking the crust itself. And look how that's folding in there.
Beautiful.
Isn't that gorgeous? Just gorgeous. And then set your timer for an hour. Voila, white chocolate cheesecake. All right, there you go. I'm gonna set up for the raspberries. So on the raspberries, what we're gonna do is I will puree the raspberries. I'm going to boil them. It's kind of like if you've ever made, homemade cranberries. It's kind of that same process. I do like to add some zest of lemon. So I want to add about 2 teaspoons of lemon zest. So if you ever zested a lemon, 1 lemon zested will give you about a teaspoon. So this does take about 2 lemons. And then we've got about 2 teaspoons here of cornstarch. So your cornstarch, you're going to want to actually, this is what's going to help thicken to create the syrup for you. And so we'll use this. And then I've also got a 1/3 cup of sugar. So this is about, I want to say 2.5 cups of fresh raspberries. And that's about what you're going to use to make the sauce. All right, so for the raspberry topping, basically I'm going to puree, mix together the sugar and the zest with 1 cup of water. But before we do that, I'm going to kind of make a slurry, and I'm going to bring all that to a boil. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and puree. So that's pretty good. And I'm going to get all this mixed together and with the sugar and the lemon zest and bring to a boil. So after I poured my puree, what we're doing here is with a wire, as thin of a wire strainer that you have, what we're going to do is we're trying to get out all of the puree and keep the seeds from going into our sauce. So we're going to just press and try to get all the sauce out. But by pureeing it, you're really able to get the benefit out of the whole raspberry. So I'm mixing the sugar. So that's looking pretty good. With the lemon zest, like I said, you're just gonna zest. And what this does to the raspberry, I'm telling you, I've done raspberries before, and if you do not put lemon in here, lemon zest, you can tell a difference. The lemon, for some reason, just gives it just a nice balance. You can delete that. Okay, now that we have all of our seeds removed and we've got my lemon zest and the puree, what we're going to do, and also the sugar is in here, I'm going to go ahead and pour it into the saucepan. I'm going to simmer this over medium heat. Once that starts simmering, then I'm going to put together 1 cup of water to the 2 teaspoons of cornstarch, and that's going to kind of create a little slurry. I'm going to mix those together first, then pour those two into the sauce here, and that's what you'll pour over your cheesecake once it's cooled. And you do want to stir this pretty consistently. You don't want to leave that sitting too long. So what I did is I put the water and the cornstarch together, and you can see this is turning kind of a lighter pink as it heats, but it will get bright again. So now that this is simmering, I'm going to go ahead and add this, the slurry mixture, and it's okay. And it's going to thin out, but it will thicken back up, so we're okay. That's the whole purpose of the slurry here, is so it can thicken back up and give us a really nice sauce. This is what the finished product of our sauce looks like. This is the proper consistency, the proper color. It is a little liquidy looking right now because it's still hot. So what we're gonna do is let it sit to get to room temperature. Once it gets to room temperature, you can put it in a container, put it in the refrigerator. You'll have it for in the morning, and that way you can put it on top of the cheesecake. So that'll be your cheesecake raspberry topping.
Cool beans.
And set it there until our cheesecake comes out in about 15 minutes. Here is the final product of the cheesecake. I did end up putting this back in the oven for about another 5 minutes. So it was a total of 65 minutes. When you get that out of the oven, you just want that center to have a little bit of jiggle to it. What we're gonna do is do not unspring the hinge on your spring pan just yet. We're gonna take a paring knife, so we don't want it to go all the way down. It won't reach the bottom where the crust is. And we're gonna take this, and it's super thin, so we're gonna take this and slide this all around the edge here. So we're just going all the way around it with a paring knife because it's thin and it's not very deep. So what I wanna do is get this to a good room temperature. And I'm gonna leave this on this pan because as you can see, we still have butter leaking through, and I wanna get some airflow under it, so I'm gonna leave this on here. We're gonna let this cool down to room temperature. Then I'll put it in the refrigerator. You wanna have this in the refrigerator for at least a good 8 hours. That will really give it time to chill and let all of those flavors blend together, and you'll get a really good, good consistency and good flavor out of it. Also, you're gonna wanna put your room temperature sauce, the raspberry sauce, in the refrigerator as well. You want that to cover. Another tip with the cheesecake, you do not want to put this in the refrigerator. You do not want to cover it with plastic until it is cooled, because what will happen is you're going to end up creating moisture under the plastic, and that moisture will actually give you condensation, and that condensation will actually affect the top of the cake, and you don't want to do that. So it's okay to put it in the refrigerator without it covered, but what I prefer to do is simply leave it out at room temperature and then put it in the fridge. So once this cools and we have the chilled sauce, I will plate it on a pretty dish and show you the final result. We're back the next morning, and here is the finished cheesecake product. This set out at room temperature, and then once it got to room temperature, I put it in the refrigerator overnight. And do not cover it in the refrigerator. Do not put plastic over it. It will be fine in the refrigerator overnight uncovered. This will keep moisture from collecting, and it'll keep your cheesecake from cracking. Also, this is the finished product of the sauce. This is pureed, all the seeds removed. This is our raspberry sauce that we're gonna put on the cheesecake. And then here are some additional raspberries that we're gonna dust with sugar and place beautifully on top of the cheesecake. I'm gonna do all this and get right back to you with a finished product. Okay folks, here you have it. The final product, white chocolate raspberry cheesecake. Thank you for joining Mama J's Kitchen. Please subscribe, more YouTube videos to come.